All right, I'm at a point now where I'm ready to start the fiberglassing. I've got everything not quite ready, but I've got a few steps to do, and I'll go over that and we'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to do on the fiberglassing. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to vacuum the whole bottom real good, and I'm going to wipe it down with denatured alcohol and clean it up and just kind of look it over. I've got some nails to fill in, and I've got some cracks that have to be filled in. You can get away with small cracks, but I've got some that I think are a little bit too big. Right here. And a few other places. This one here is kind of borderline. The front looks pretty good as far as I think that'll cover, but I want to put a bead of caulk down the keel to get rid of that sharp 90, and then we'll fiberglass over that. I'm going to leave these pieces off here until I do the bottom, so I'll just work around that. I've got some plugs in that I've got to finish up. And I'm just going to go over the whole thing and try and see what anything else needs to be done before I start. I'll need 4 straight days, I think, to do this. So I'm going to make sure everything's prepped up. The heat's pretty high right now after morning, so I want to put the coats on in the morning while it's still a little bit cool. And we're going to go through that step by step. And I'm not recommending this for anybody. I'm just showing you what I used. It's called Dynaflex 230 window door siding trim in cedar tan. I'll probably do a follow-up in a year, next year, the year after, and we'll see how this holds up. But it's going to be covered with fiberglass. It was cheap. It's not expensive. And one thing I've learned, if this would have been called Marine Dynaflex or Boat Dynaflex, they could have charged 4 times more for that. All right, filled the cracks in with some wood putty, and I want to say this was a mistake. I bought some wood putty. It looked like it matched, but when I finished the bottom, it didn't match at all. So what I should have done was mix the wood flour with my polyester resin and filled it with that, and it wouldn't have shown. But you live and learn. I filled all the cracks and sanded it, but it showed through, very bright color against the cedar. So I should have mixed my poly. I had everything there. I could have done it, but I didn't, and I learned a lesson when the boat got done. I just went through and filled all the cracks that I could, any bad spots. I even did mix a little of the resin and patched a few spots when I ran out of the wood putty, and you can't see where I patched it with the resin. So I should have done that. Another thing I should have done, I should have mixed the resin with the wood flour and did the whole keel. There's a lot of air, a lot of checking in the keel, and I had trouble getting my resin to stick on the keel without getting air bubbles. So that was another problem I had later. All right, I just want to take a minute and talk about the finish. I'm ready to put the finish on, and I'm going to fiberglass it. And there was a few choices that I could have done. The first choice is you could just paint it. And if you're putting your boat in and out of the water from a trailer and you're doing it a couple times a year, it's going to want to swell every time you put it in and out if you paint it. And it's really not good for the boat if you're going to leave it in all year and you paint it and it swells up and it won't leak. So that's probably the best thing to do. So I'm not going to paint. That's the cheapest way to go. The second option, which I kind of wish I would have done, but I didn't. When I did the other boat, I used an epoxy paint primer, which was really good. So I kind of wish I would have used that. Epoxy primer and epoxy paint. That might have worked out pretty good. The third way I could have gone was epoxy fiberglass. And because of the roughness of the surface and the cracks and the seams, I just didn't feel comfortable putting the epoxy right over bare wood, which is what you're supposed to do. And I was afraid I'd get air underneath of it. And the last way is to use the polyester fiberglassing. And what that does is you put a coat on it. You can put 2 coats on it. You don't have to sand it between coats. It stays tacky. You can put 3 coats on it if you wanted to fill the cracks. Then you can put the fiberglass on. You can put another coat on. Then you can put a coat on with wax and it will harden. Or you can paint it and that'll seal it. And then you can sand it after that. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try putting a coat on it tomorrow. Seeing how it looks. It'll probably soak into the seams, so I'll have to put another coat on it. Hopefully the seams will close up and I can get to the fiberglass. And then I'll get another coat on top of that. Now you could put a wax into the last coat and that will harden it, but I think I'm just going to paint on top. I think I'm going to use polyurethane varnish for my last coat. I'm going to check either that or spar varnish. Then sand it, another coat, sand it, another coat, and we'll see what it looks like. I always have the option to do bottom boat paint on the last coat. If it doesn't look right, if something goes wrong, I could just paint it with the bottom paint. So that's my options. The weather's been horribly hot. It's over 90 degrees during the day, so I've got about 2 hours in the morning to put the polyester on. And I'm going to start that tomorrow morning. I got the whole bottom, I got the big cracks sealed, I got the bumps sealed, I got the gouges sealed, I got the screw holes sealed. So everything's all ready to go. So tomorrow, first thing, I'll mix up the polyester and try putting the first coat on it. We'll see how that turns out. So I'll see you in the morning. I'm ready to mix up my polyester resin. Here's what I'm using. Polyester resin. You buy this from fiberglasssite.com. That's where I recommend you buy either epoxy or fiberglass. They'll help you out. It's got all the instructions on it. It's a good quality product. And I'm going to mix up a quart for now and just use the hardener, no wax. And on the back it has what you need to do for a quart at the temperature. 1 quart takes 11 cc's. So I'll mix that up. I've got my brush and roller ready. Before it gets hot, we'll see how that works out. So I started my primer coat. I started using a sponge roller, which was about useless. I ended up using just a plastic scraper and a brush. That seemed to work the best, but I started out with a sponge roller and quickly abandoned that. But on my first coat, it sucks up a lot of your polyester resin, and it does take quite a bit to do the first coat, and you just let it suck in and put a coat on it. It kind of seals it like a primer coat of paint would. I just went over the whole bottom. Again, this stuff doesn't dry. It stays tacky until you put the last sealer on it, then it hardens. The first primer coat didn't fill in the cracks, but it did seal the wood up so that it would take the second coat, and that filled in most of the cracks. On my second coat, I just poured it and used a scraper and spread it around. And again, we're going to see how this works out. We're going to give it a year or 2 years and do a follow-up video. Most people use the epoxy because it's more flexible, but it's more expensive. It took 3 gallons to do the whole boat from start to finish. I got about a half a gallon left, and I could have put it on thicker. I wish I would have put it on thicker, especially on the glass, the fiberglass coat. But it is what it is, and we'll see how it works out. It costs probably in between $300 and $350 to do the whole boat. I found this was the best way to put it on, is just use a scraper, and you can brush it, feather it out a little bit with a brush. It's quite messy. It ends up a mess. That's why I wish I would have painted. This is the second coat. Then I did a glass coat. Then I did 2 coats on top of that. So there's 4 coats. And then I did 3 coats of varnish. There's 7 coats. And there's a day in between. I just lined up the bottom of the fiberglass matting with the trim board, and then stretched it over the top and then cut it. It wasn't hard. It really was not difficult. Most of your mistakes are reversible. And I did go over the transom just about 2 inches. Anywhere where there's a 90 degrees, you have trouble. Going over the transom and over the keel was the hardest parts. And I made a mistake. I should have tried this fiberglass and gone right around the keel, but I thought what I would do was stop going up the side of the keel, then put a strip all the way down the keel, which you'll see later. I should have attempted to run this matting across the top and down the other side. I think it would have worked out better than it did, but that's the way it goes. Just cut the excess off with a pair of scissors. I had to use 2 pieces because the fiberglass matting only comes in 50-inch pieces. Here's a mistake right there. I learned about that, and you'll see it in a minute. I just soaked it in and went into the corner with the matting and up the side. I should have attempted at least to go right around the keel, but I got something in my head to do, and that was kind of a bad idea. I only did this with 1 person. It seemed to go fine. You have about 20 minutes in between mixes. I mix a quart up at a time and just worked it, pushing the glass up and down. You're going to see my mistake coming up here in a second. One thing I wish I would have done was put more polyester resin on this glass. I didn't starve the matting, but it could have used more. A nice thick layer would have been better. I think would have covered better. But with the vertical sides of the boat, you don't want too many runs. You got to get them out of there. And I just kept working it in and moving it around. Once you get the matting soaked, then you kind of work out the wrinkles. They work out pretty easy. I tried to keep the matting at the bottom, at the trim piece, up 1 inch so that I could sand it without sanding into the matting. This is a laminating roller. And you have to do fiberglass resin. Now I just cut the excess off the razor knife, and I trimmed it down so it wasn't too sharp. If you run your resin up a little bit high, it cuts a lot easier. Some of the places where there was no resin, it didn't cut real well, but it went fine. And I did the same thing to the other side. I just went up the one side with the matting, and I didn't do the bottom of the keel. After I got the fiberglass down, I just put 2 more coats of resin on top of it. I abandoned the roller and I just used a brush. Just spread it around. And put 2 coats on top of the fiberglass matting. I'm just using up the last of a batch I had, so I'm just kind of using that up till I make up a new batch. Now this I wanted to use a strip going down here, and I went on to Amazon and bought a strip that was sewn on the edges, and this was a mistake. It was too thin, and it just wasn't good matting, good fiberglass matting, but it is what it is. I wish I would have just tried to wrap that woven mat that I put on the sides right around the keel and see how that turned out. Like I said before, the keel was checked quite a bit, so it was hard to get all the air out. So I had some imperfections in there, but overall it came out all right. Just put the resin on just like I did on the sides. I put another thick coat of polyester over everything, and then I painted the last coat with varnish. That's what I'm doing here now. I use spar varnish with a high UV repellent mixed in with it. Right, and like I said before, that polyester doesn't hard until you seal it off. So what this first coat does, it just seals the polyester resin, and then that makes it harden. Leave it set for a day or two, put another coat of varnish on it, sanding in between, and that'll finish the bottom off with on the next video. I have some more things to do, but this coat here just seals the polyester and lets it harden up. That'll end this video. We'll finish it up on the next video. That ends its fiberglass coating. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video and help me out a little bit. And there's what it came out looking like at the end. See you on the next video.